Good evening. I'm Bea Banyu. I'm chair of the Food Studies program here at the New School, and I welcome you to this evening's special film screening of American Masters documentary James Beard, America's First Foodie, which will be followed by a little discussion with the film's co-producer, Kathleen Squires, and Mitchell Davis, who is the VP of the James Beard Foundation, and Fabio Parasecoli, who is the director of our food studies initiatives here at the New School. But before we start the program, let me tell you a little bit about the food studies program we are offering here at the New School. We offer full degrees, the Bachelor of Arts and the Bachelor of Science, as well as a two-year degree, which is the Associate of Applied Arts. We take, as food studies does, an aggressively interdisciplinary approach, and we deal with culture, media, communication, health, environment, policy, and politics. We also evaluate professional culinary school training and prior learning as part of our academic programs on a regular basis. For those of you who are not interested in a degree but interested in taking some courses, you should check Open Campus, which is our new venue for non-credit participation. Several of our classes are listed there on a regular basis, and you're quite welcome to attend them. We also do a bunch of special programs. This is obviously one of them. The next food-related special program is on June 7th, and that's one of the New York Times talks. They have several different talks scheduled, but this one actually is about an up-and-coming film called Beatrice at Dinner, which stars Selma Hayek, John Lithgow, and the director is Miguel Areta. And they're going to be here to talk about the film. So the film's going to be shown, and they'll be talking about it too. It's not in this room. It's actually in Tishman Auditorium, which is in the new building at 63 Fifth Avenue. So definitely check our website, or if you're interested in getting notices for special programs, talk to the people outside, and they'll be glad to put you on the list if you're not already on the list. I also want to mention our online magazine called The Inquisitive Eater. Not only is it a good read, but for any of you who are critics or writers or photographers or artists or poets, they accept submissions from anybody internal to the New School community and externally. We vet them and then we publish them. So we encourage you to read it and to perhaps participate as well. Just to note, we are actually taping this program tonight, and there should be a Q&A session after the discussion. So we'll ask you to wait until the microphones arrive at your seat before you ask your question, because we want to make sure that the question is recorded as well as the answer. And there will be people walking around with the two microphones, so just raise your hand and they'll get to you eventually. So now, I would like to welcome Susan Ungaro, president of the James Beard Foundation.
Thank you so much, Bea, for welcoming us here. I also want to thank a few other people, obviously, the Associate Professor and Director of Food Studies here, along Fabio Parasecoli, and Pam Tillis, who is Director of Public Programs, who helped organize this, and Keith Butler, our new-ish Director of Development at the James Beard Foundation. So for those of you, I see people that I know and some new faces here, so it's just really so exciting for us to be able to bring the story of James Beard and the story of the James Beard Foundation to new friends and old friends alike. Our foundation is truly excited about the PBS American Masters series on James Beard. It's part of a chef's flight of 4 great chefs, and it's Julia Child, James Beard, Alice Waters, and Jacques Pepin. So to have James Beard in the company of those other 3 great chefs really, warms our heart. For those of you who may not know the James Beard Foundation, we're very close by. We're on 12th Street, West 12th Street, on 167 West 12th Street, in an old townhouse that James Beard lived in the last dozen or so years of his life. And I hope that you'll check out our website to see more about what we're about. But most of all, we're really excited about the PBS American Masters series. This documentary is bringing to life James Beard. And if you think about it, James Beard was born in 1903. So imagine that this man, who's had an incredible influence on American cookery and on today's chefs and thought leaders, and the fact that co-producer Kathleen Squires, who's with us today, and her partner, her director, Elizabeth Federici, and PBS thought enough of James Beard's impact on our food world it just makes our foundation, which is actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, even more excited. The film you're about to see also won the Audience Award for Best Documentary at the Sonoma International Film Festival. And I just heard tonight that Saveur magazine has named it as one of the top 6 food films you must see this year. So I want to congratulate Kathleen especially, who you'll be hearing more later from in the conversation that follows the film. This will be my 5th time seeing the film, and I will tell you, I've enjoyed it that much, really. But I just want to tell you a few things that are referenced in the film, but that I really love about James Beard, his life and the man. His first taste memory, he talks about being in his mother's kitchen when he was just a toddler and went into the vegetable bin and bit into a raw onion. Now, most of us, I heard a few groans, would say, ooh, but that's what made him fall in love with onions. Onions are even in the film, you'll see. He came to New York to be a singer or an actor. He wanted to be on Broadway and opera, and as a struggling performer, what did he end up doing? He ended up getting into the food business, ran a catering company, and actually his first cookbook was hors d'oeuvres and canapes. He also often talked that the best utensils are your hands, and he even sometimes referred to his hands as salad tossers. I just love that. He was really the first to talk about cooking in season, in regional ingredients in American cooking, long before farm to table became a trend in this country. I mean, we're talking like the late 1940s. And he's probably most famous for saying, food is our common ground. He truly believed, and we do too, that the best way to connect with people is over a table, sharing a meal, and even in travel. When he would travel to cities, the first place he'd visit would be the farmers markets and the seafood ports. He really believed that you learn more about a culture by seeing what they're eating than just by seeing the beautiful architecture and other entertainment. And finally, in these challenging times for food, nutrition, and agriculture in this country, I especially love this quote of James Beard's that I've just begun to use a little bit more frequently these days. And here's what he said: "If we really believe in food, we must do something about it, for our voices should be raised above the rest." So please enjoy the film, and as you heard from Bea, we'll be back with a conversation, and hopefully you'll have lots of great questions and more insights into who James Beard was and why he really mattered to our food story. Thanks.
Well, I've only seen it 3 times, but I know why Susan can watch it 5 and still find something to love about that movie.
I could perform it for you at this point, word for word. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I just feel so honored that there's been such a great response, and just to have such wonderful participants in the film. Mitchell is probably one of the best Beard scholars that I've ever encountered during the process, and Susan and everybody who chose to step up and share their stories about James Beard, I think, did in such a wonderful way.
I wanted to ask you, what was it like to go back and find so much material? How did you create the story with all the stuff that clearly you were able to get your hands on?
It was not easy to do in a PBS hour, which is actually 52 minutes. But thankfully, there is, as you have seen, there is some footage, not a lot of footage of James Beard. The Fales collection at NYU has all of that correspondence that you have seen, the date books, the medical records. We even found his passports there. His friends were very generous with sharing some of their photographs, memorabilia. So it was hard to pare away how much we had, but it was not hard to obtain because of everyone's willingness to share.
Which were the elements that you found more, I don't know, surprising during this research?
There were so many things that were surprising to me as someone who had been a part of the foundation for almost 2 decades, a long time. I thought I had known a lot about James Beard, but I had no idea that he was kicked out of Reed College for being gay. I think I didn't really understand his involvement with City Meals on Wheels. I didn't know the story of Gino Cavacci. So there was just so much. I didn't really know that he was not that great on television either. You could see he was a little bit of a deer in the headlights at moments.
Sponge cake.
Mitchell, you represent the James Beard Foundation in the U.S. and basically all over the world. So how do you communicate to other people from other cultures this person that is so quintessentially American?
Well, Beard obviously himself was quintessentially American, so that helps to start there. And I think that in other cultures, there are icons that stand to represent cuisines. In France, Escoffier; in Italy, Pellegrino Artusi; in various places. And I think the surprise for people isn't so much that there is a James Beard, but that for so long there had been this person pushing us to some sort of culinary, gastronomic, American edible heights and lows, which I think is an important part about James Beard's Americanness, that he was not just about, as we saw in that movie, he was not just about the Four Seasons and the fanciest food, but also how to make a good hamburger, and his favorite thing was a bowl of chili. And so I think that he himself was such an American personage that it makes the job of representing him, of all of us at the James Beard Foundation, as we do every day, easy. And I think it also gives us so much to play with, because he, as Susan said at the opening of tonight's program, he represented so many things we take for granted today. Seasonality of food, that there were regional ingredients, even seasonal ingredients. We heard some of the chefs in the documentary, which I think did such a good job of making it contemporary, making his influence contemporary, refer to things that, putting the name of a farm on a menu, all these sorts of things that I think really laid a groundwork for the people who came after him to create an American cuisine and an American style that I think, again, makes our job at the James Beard Foundation that much easier, because we have so much to work with.
He comes across as a complex figure, and your choice of putting a commercial at the beginning of the film, what was that about? I mean, it was really this idea of showing James Beard in all his aspects, or what was the thinking?
I think the flour commercial just really brings forth his sense of humor. There was something about it that I felt like, that's, if you were in a room with him, he would be just like that. He would speak just like that, in that way. And I think it also just introduced the people to how important a figure that he was. Flour companies wanted him to sponsor them. And as Clark Wolf points out, during a time when people didn't really do that. And today, as he said, you're not a person if you don't have an endorsement deal. So it's very
I would
different.
add that it adds to his Americanness, that there is an entrepreneurial spirit. You could call it hucksterism or whatever. But I think that for us to pretend that there is no relationship between food and money in an American cuisine, I think would also be disingenuous to who we really are. And so, although I know throughout his time, Beard was taken to task a little bit for his sponsorships, he forged himself a career, made a living, lived a good life in a way that he was America's first foodie. I think he was also a prototypical blogger, because he sort of created this idea of a raconteur, of a bon vivant, and of someone who bared himself in his day-to-day chit-chat in a way that I think is also very contemporary and very American. And money's a part of that too.
Absolutely. And how was it to work with so many relevant chefs? I mean, you're a food writer yourself, so it must have been quite an experience to get to meet all these people and try to sort of tease out their experiences about James Beard, their reflections. How was it for you?
It was so much easier than I thought, honestly, because everyone really stepped up and wanted to share their stories and remembrances about James Beard. I think they had these stories bottled up for so long and were waiting for the right opportunity. This is the first time that his story is being told on film, so thankfully they weren't tapped out by the time we approached them.
I was just going to add, what I love about this movie, and after almost 24 years at the James Beard Foundation, I thought I had read everything and seen everything and known everything, and this is my third time, and I'm still learning some things, so I commend you and your team. You just did such a great job. But one of the things that I think is so fascinating, this is your field, Fabio, is that from the contemporary history of it, adding the pieces that wouldn't have been told when he died and his biography was written in 1986 or 87, or when he was alive, because we are comfortable with different parts of people now, different stories that we tell, and so that there's still such contemporary narrative to express about someone who died 30 years ago. Most chefs who come cook at the Beard House died before, or were born after James Beard died, but still in his footsteps, in his kitchen, they helped to shape American cuisine, and I think that it's just so lovely to see the contemporary history told of this sort of historic figure.
Not only that, I think the movie really takes you through the history of food in America, the frontier of Portland and the role of New York. I think, in a way, it's great to see how he was the result of this history, but he also shaped and gave a new direction to this, which I find very interesting, especially the aspect of being a man in sort of a female world. Can you tell us something more about that? I mean, because in a way, it seems that she had complicated relationships with women, but at the same time, he had very close relationships with them, and he was working in a field where most relevant people were women.
Yeah, it was very interesting because back at that time, let's face it, there weren't a whole lot of people writing about food in the first place. So he was a pioneer in that way, and he did circulate comfortably in this world of women. And I think he enjoyed having a harem of sorts in that way. He enjoyed sharing. He enjoyed just having that constant motion of a food scene around him, which I do think exists today, but just in such a larger scale. It seemed much more intimate back then, for sure.
The James Beard Foundation also does a lot for new young chefs, right? Support. What sort of values do you think this young generation can sort of get out of knowing more about James Beard, and how does that connection work?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that when you look at what food in America is today, and we're fortunate to live in a time, I think, where you can eat as well as in America as you can eat anywhere in the world, and in places in America that James Beard couldn't have imagined. I don't think there are great chefs and restaurants and farmers and producers and farmers markets just about everywhere. But I think that something that he valued was a sort of do it yourself, do it anyway, don't let anyone stop you mentality that you see in restaurants in Brooklyn and Portland and Asheville and Nashville and all over, that I think it's hard to pinpoint what American cuisine is, really, because we are the product of so many different cuisines from all over the world and so many different traditions. But that attitude, let's throw it together, let's have a party, let's make it a good time, let's forget a little bit for this moment that we're together, cooking, eating, enjoying everything else, and be here and celebrate, I think, is a contribution that America has to food in our own country and globally, and I think that's one of the most important things. Beard cooked from grocery stores. He cooked from, he cooked from cans. He cooked what was around, and he made it good, and he made it fun, and he didn't let that stop the party and the coming together that I think is so important about food. And so, to me, it's that attitude. He wrote an essay that I refer to a lot in my writing called "An American Attitude Toward Food" that I think is much more resonant almost than an American cuisine, but it's our attitude to food that I think we can thank him for, and that we continue, chefs working today and people cooking today really are a legacy of James Beard.
Before we open it to the public, I just like to ask you: will you continue working on James Beard as a writer, as an author? What's your plan?
Absolutely. Well, I have a piece coming out in the LA Times next weekend about visiting the Oregon coast through the eyes of James Beard. So that's it's so many ways he's inspired me. So it's so nice that I could do something beyond the film. But I think that I'll always be thinking of him when I'm doing my food writing, for sure. And I think there's a lot of stories that still need to be told from his world.
Great. So let's open it to the audience. If you have questions, please make sure to speak at the microphone so we can record it. Questions for Kathleen or Mitchell?
Or Fabio.
Or Fabio.
Hi. I was wondering, we heard a lot about his close interactions and appreciation of what happens in markets, and you're opening a market that is in his name. Did he have any close relationships with farmers, to actual farms or farmers?
Yeah, I know that when he traveled the country, one of the things that he really enjoyed doing was visiting the farms and the different pockets that he was, and especially even when he traveled out of the country in France, he would revel in those times, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he was much closer. We're much more distant now from farming than I think he would have been, certainly in 1903 in Oregon, but farmers were closer to us in our lives then. And so I think most probably profoundly at the Four Seasons, that he, and it should be said, Mimi Sheridan, who also worked on that menu, just to give her some credit, someone else who lives on 12th Street, continues to be with us. James Beard and Mimi Sheridan insisted on putting farmers' names on menus, which was crazy, really crazy, I think, an idea. We take it for granted today, but to put an attention of the place that the food came from, to add to the conversation, it wasn't just written in French. And actually the first menus at the Four Seasons were written in French, interestingly, but they had American ingredients, they had shad roe, and they had farmers' names and geographic places that things came from. I think that's as radical then as it really is today in some ways, in America, in the context of the United States.
Gentlemen?
I was wondering, does Fritz Maytag have an ongoing relationship with the foundation, being the first monetary investor in the foundation? Is he recognized, remembered, still involved in any way?
I wouldn't say that he's actively involved. His name is on a wall, and he was, as you say, an important contributor, Fritz Maytag being both heir to the Maytag appliance family, but also the brewery, Anchorstein Brewery, one of the first great American craft beers, who was instrumental, as were others, as we saw at the founding of the foundation. And I know this comes from an informed member and supporter, a longtime supporter of the Beard Foundation. Everyone rallied around Peter Kump, who was the friend who spearheaded the coming together of the chef community, the culinary instructor community, and the students and friends of James Beard community to raise the money to buy the house and to come up with this idea that I don't think was fully formed when they took that important act of purchasing real estate in Manhattan, but invited Wolfgang Puck with Larry Forgione and everyone to come and cook and create this model of a showcase for American cuisine. Itself also a radical idea, that there would be a need for such a showcase, that there would be this thing called American cuisine, all this stuff. Beard was very famous, but I was struck in this viewing of the movie. His classes were $500. Those cooking classes were $500 35 years ago. Cooking classes are still $500 for a series of cooking classes, right? Well, now dinner is also $500. That has changed, but so he personally touched in those classes, I would say, a certain category of person, but his books, his writing, his no-nonsense approach, I think, touched so many more. And they did come out and rally support around the seed money by Fritz Maytag and others, Bernard Perry and others who supported the start of the foundation and continue to be engaged.
Thank you. Two quick questions. So first, Kathleen, you mentioned the PBS hour. If you were given the 53rd or 55th minutes, what the clip or the story you would have liked to have told. And then for both you and Mitchell, I'm curious what you think James Beard would think of the food world today, what he'd be most excited about or perhaps most disappointed by.
There's a lot on the cutting room floor that I really wish we could do the sequel, the James Beard Part 2. One of the stories that I really loved about James Beard is that because his father never was around much and he would come and go, his father figure was a Chinese cook named Juliet, who started cooking in James Beard's mother's boarding house. But then after she closed her boarding house, started cooking for the family and had a very interesting relationship with James Beard's mother. They cooked together, they fought a lot. It's unclear as to whether they were romantic, but they definitely had a partnership. And James Beard writes in his memoir, Delights and Prejudices, about what a father figure Juliet was to him. He talks about his fondness for Christmas gifts and the Christmas celebration, and just that he was a very attentive mentor to him also in cooking. He learned a lot about Asian ingredients and food in general because from Juliet, in addition to his mother, because Let, as they called him, also, like, he would cook everything from terrapin soup to vol au vent to, basic Chinese recipes. So if I had another film to do, it would probably be about that relationship.
I'll take the second question. There's so many, who knows what James Beard would think. I happen to think you couldn't be anything but surprised and delighted, to use his word, for what's gone on in food in America. But I'll refer to a scene I saw play out last summer in Copenhagen at the Mad Food Symposium, Mad Food Camp, which very famous chef René Redzepi puts on, and 500 chefs come from around the world, mostly young, mostly European, but from all over the world. And Jacques Pepin opened that conference last year, who has his own, as Susan said, his own American Master show. And he told stories and boned a chicken in front of the most cutting-edge chefs in the world. And they were raptured watching him do this and listening to him tell his stories. And I can't help but think Beard would have been next, or maybe first on that stage, sort of reminding people of what food really is and where we come from and where we're going, celebrating, appreciating, enjoying all of it, but also just basking in the reverence of the simple things like boning a chicken, making a hamburger, cooking something delicious for people who loved you back for it. I just could see him in that role today as any day.
I could even see him tweeting about his new favorite restaurant, or everything from his new favorite restaurant to maybe a cut of beef that he didn't realize that he could use in a certain way, to everything to the bitchy tweet of, who does this chef think he is? I could see him doing that today, for sure.
I think the fact that he would answer the phone when people would call and ask for advice, that's the Twitter attitude, right? You have to be on the piece, answer right there, 3:00 in the morning, or not. But I
would have loved it all.
Hey, I just want to commend you on the film because I feel like you get a lot of information out of it, but then you walk away wanting to know more and maybe be a little bit more involved. So this question is actually for Mitchell, because the foundation is a great place, I think, for people to be involved. And someone like me, who I'm a concierge at a hotel, and the James Beard name has always been around. But now that I'm thinking, okay, now what do I do with this information? And now that I know a little bit more, what could I find at the foundation? Like, what are some upcoming events or things that are happening that people could get excited about, or what are you excited about that's coming up?
Where do we begin? It's a great, thank you for the question, and it's really nice to hear that a film like this can really bring people in. It's watching it brings me in again. I have to say, makes going to work, makes us all proud to continue to go to work. The foundation, if you go to jamesbeard.org, you see a lot of things that are going on. Some of them in New York, some of them around the country, and we really operate on 4 or 5 different tracks. One are the events that happen at the Beard House itself. Those are not inexpensive, but reasonably priced celebrations of chefs from around the United States and from around the world. And they happen on a pretty regular basis. We also have a group called the Greens, which we call Foodies Under 40, which do, I would say, lesser commitment type of events, little geared to younger audience, but also that same level of gastronomic enthusiasm, let's say. Increasingly, we also are doing all sorts of programs to educate people about our food system and the choices that we make about how we feed ourselves and how we feed others. And so if you come to the Beard Foundation, you'll see opportunities to engage with us in regular correspondence and educative pieces about sustainability, about food waste, about all sorts of ideas that impact the way that food is produced. Ultimately, if you sign up for our publications, you see things happening all over the city and all over the country that we hope will engage you. We have books, we have programs, we allow people to come to readings and talks like this and all sorts of stuff going on, really to engage people at every level of food. And it isn't just about fine dining, certainly, and it isn't just about sitting down to dinner, but it's about helping people think, engage, react, participate in this amazing time we are in America and food in a meaningful way for you and a way that we hope is infectious for everybody. So come to jamesbeard.org, sign up for our newsletter, and I think you'll see tons of ways that you can participate. We hope to see you there.
One last question.
No pressure. My question is for Kathleen. So a couple of the chefs in the film were cooking during their interviews. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about? Was it by your recommendation? Was it their idea?
Yeah, well, as a food writer, of course, I wanted some food in the film. And when we first put together the trailer, which was very short and just kind of gave us our jump start to making the rest of the film, I said to the co-producer director, I love it, where's the food? So that's when we sat down and thought about, yeah, let's really think about how we want to put in James Beard's recipes and who we want to do that, the people who are especially skilled at cooking and talking at the same time. And it really, all of those scenes that we shot ended up being our favorite because, well, we got to eat some of that veal stew that Daniel Ballou made and Jacques Pepin making crepes. It was just amazing to watch him do it over and over again, like clockwork and so effortlessly. Just to show you how food brings people together, because it's one thing to interview someone and have a conversation. It's another thing to do an interview where you're cooking together or sitting and talking over cooking. When we were shooting Jacques Pepin, after we were done, we were chit-chatting amongst ourselves of where we would like to take the crew, maybe for a glass of wine afterwards. And he overheard us and he said, "Oh, I will tell you the best wine bar in Westport, Connecticut." And he scurried away and he came back with this like bucket full of rosé. And he said, "This is the best wine bar in Westport, Connecticut." So it was just that everyone was really generous with their sharing of the cooking.
Well, we're out of time, actually. I would like to thank you, Kathleen and Mitchell.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you to the James Beard Foundation and Susan. And if you're interested in programs like this, just leave your name at the right outside at the table, and we'll make sure to be in touch. Thank you so much. Good night.